After many years, I suddenly ran into my ex-girlfriend in the same restaurant, at the same table. We had both changed, but one question was still the same as before. If I got a chance to start again, would I agree? My name is Liam. This is a story that happened in my life. I never thought I would set foot in that place again after so long. I used to deliberately avoid that part of the city where my ex-girlfriend and I used to meet. Because it's not just streets and buildings there, many old memories of mine are trapped in that place. Still, strangely, an office task took me exactly there that day. The afternoon light was soft. There were light clouds in the sky and the air carried a scent of old days. When I finished work and stepped outside, my eyes suddenly fell on a restaurant. It looked ordinary from the outside, but my chest trembled slightly. Because I knew this restaurant very well, I stood there for a few seconds. I felt torn between going inside or walking away. I used to come to this place often, not alone. There was someone beside me whose laughter used to fill the whole place. I shook my head and brought myself back to the present. After so many years, I didn't want to lose to old memories. Yet a strange pull forced me to push the door open and go inside. As soon as I entered, the first thing I felt was a familiar warmth. The lighting was as soft as before and the corner tables were quiet. And just then, my eyes stopped at a table by the window where my ex-girlfriend was sitting. For a moment, it felt like my breath stopped. She was sitting there. Even after so long, I recognized her immediately. Time had changed her, but not completely. Her hair was a little longer. There was slight tiredness at the corners of her eyes, but that familiar, calm face was still there. She was looking at her phone, maybe waiting for someone. My first instinct was to turn around and leave. For years, I had convinced myself that everything was over, that the old chapter was closed, but my feet felt stuck to the floor. Just then she looked up and our eyes met. That moment was strange. There was surprise in her eyes at first, then a flash of recognition. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. All the sounds around us seemed to fade away. Then she gave a small smile, a careful, slightly awkward smile. I realized it was no longer possible to walk away. I slowly walked toward her table. An unexplainable pounding filled my chest. Even after so many years, I couldn't understand why I felt this way. Standing beside the table, I said, "How are you?" Hearing my own voice felt unfamiliar. She sat up a little straighter and said, "I'm fine, how are you?" "I'm fine," I replied, even though waves of memories were rising inside me. She looked around and said, "Will you sit?" I hesitated for a second, then pulled out a chair and sat down. The waiter came and took our order. We both ordered something we used to have often before. Noticing that, we both smiled lightly. At first, the silence felt heavy. Neither of us knew where to begin. Finally, she said, "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" I nodded. "Yeah, a long time." Then slowly the conversation began with ordinary topics, work, busyness, how life was going. But behind these simple words, there was an invisible pull. We both knew that the relationship between us was more than just a casual acquaintance. As we talked, my eyes suddenly fell on the corner of the table. This was the exact spot where she used to absent-mindedly trace lines with her finger, and I would laugh watching her. The memory returned so vividly that I smiled without realizing it. She asked curiously, "Why are you smiling?" After thinking for a moment, I said, "Do you remember how you always used to draw lines on the table while sitting here?" She stayed silent for a few seconds, then a soft smile slowly appeared on her face. "You still remember that?" I didn't answer, I just smiled. But deep inside, I was thinking I hadn't been able to forget many things. The memories of those days suddenly became very clear. When we were in a relationship, this restaurant was our little refuge. At the end of busy days, we would come and sit here. She would tell me stories about her day, and I would listen. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we laughed for no reason. She suddenly said, "We spent so much time here, didn't we?" There was a hint of nostalgia in her voice. Looking out the window, I said, "Yeah, back then everything felt much simpler." She nodded slowly. "It was simple, but we made it complicated ourselves." Hearing her words put a slight pressure in my chest, because she was right. There wasn't any dramatic reason behind our breakup. There were misunderstandings, pride, and many unspoken words. In a calm voice, I said, "We were both very immature back then." She looked at me. There was a kind of gentleness in her eyes. "Maybe, but I've learned a lot." I nodded. "Me too." The waiter brought the food. For a few moments, we ate quietly. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it felt strangely familiar. I noticed that she was much calmer now than before. There was a sense of maturity in her, and seeing that made me feel good, yet somewhere it also caused a slight ache. Because if we had been this mature back then, maybe the story would have been different. She suddenly said, "Do you ever think about us?" The question made me pause. My ex-girlfriend was looking at me. There was curiosity in her eyes, but even more than that, there was caution, as if my answer mattered to her. I stayed silent for a few seconds. The truth was, I had thought about us many times. There were nights when I couldn't sleep and our old conversations wandered through my mind, but saying these things out loud wasn't easy. Slowly I said, "Yeah, sometimes I do." My ex-girlfriend let out a soft breath as if she had expected that answer. "I do too," she said quietly. "Especially when I pass by this place." I looked around. The restaurant was still the same as before, but we had changed. Time had taken us down separate paths. I said, "Do you remember the first day we came here?" My ex-girlfriend smiled immediately. "Of course I remember. You were so nervous that you accidentally took someone else's order." I laughed. "And you laughed so loudly that the whole restaurant looked at us." As that memory came back, a warm feeling spread through my chest. Back then we found so much joy in the smallest things. Even an ordinary day became special, simply because we were together. Resting her hand on the table, my ex-girlfriend said, "Back then it felt like it would always stay that way." I could feel the regret hidden in her words. "We tried," I said calmly. "But everything doesn't always go the way we want." My ex-girlfriend stayed quiet for a moment. Her eyes were on the window, but I could tell she was really looking into the past. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she said softly. "What?" I asked. "We both loved each other and still drifted apart." There was no accusation in her voice, only a deep exhaustion. Hearing that made my chest feel a little heavy, because it was true. Love alone doesn't guarantee that a relationship will last. I said, "Sometimes the timing just isn't right." My ex-girlfriend looked at me. "Do you think, if we met now for the first time, the story would be different?" The question was unexpected. After thinking for a few moments, I said, "Maybe we're more understanding now, but without the past, we wouldn't be who we are today." She nodded slowly. "You've changed a lot," my ex-girlfriend said. I smiled lightly. "You have too." As we kept talking, time passed. We remembered the small moments from our past, sudden trips, pointless arguments, and making up afterward. Every memory carried a feeling with it. At one point, my ex-girlfriend said, "Do you remember when we sat here and talked so much about the future?" I remembered. Back then, we had dreamed so much. Where we would live, what we would do, everything had seemed so clear. "Yeah," I said quietly. "We thought everything would go according to plan." She smiled faintly, but there was a touch of sadness in it. "Life doesn't really care about our plans," I agreed with her. Over the past few years, life had taught me many things, especially the art of letting go. I noticed my ex-girlfriend was looking at me deeply. There were many unspoken words in her gaze. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure," I replied. After a brief hesitation, she said, "Have you ever been able to forget our last day?" At her question, the scene of that day flashed in my mind, heated words, misunderstandings, and a long silence at the end. We were both hurt, but neither of us knew how to say it properly. I told the truth. "Not completely, but I've learned to accept it." She nodded slowly. "Me too," she said. "It took a long time, but it doesn't hurt the way it used to." Hearing that brought a strange sense of peace inside me. It felt like we had finally reached an understanding with our past. The lights inside the restaurant were starting to dim. Evening had fallen. I could feel that this conversation wasn't just about remembering old memories. There was something more within it, something that still hadn't been said. My ex-girlfriend said softly, "Running into you today strangely feels nice." Looking into her eyes, I said, "Me too." My ex-girlfriend looked at me for a few seconds. That gaze felt strangely familiar. There was a time when I could understand its meaning even with my eyes closed. It seemed it hadn't changed much even now. Soft music was playing inside the restaurant. The tables around us were slowly filling up, but around our table, a separate silence seemed to form. She said slowly, "Did you ever think we'd sit and talk like this again?" I shook my head. "No, honestly, I thought we might never see each other again." My ex-girlfriend smiled lightly. "I thought so too, but life sometimes brings people face to face again in very strange ways." I silently agreed with her. If it weren't for that office task today, if I hadn't walked into this restaurant, this moment would never have happened. We sat quietly for a while. Even within that silence, there were many words. I noticed my ex-girlfriend was holding her coffee cup with both hands, just like before. Whenever she was lost in thought, she always held it that way. I asked softly, "What are you thinking about?" She seemed slightly startled, as if returning from far away. I was thinking how easily we lost each other. There was no accusation in her words, only a deep realization. I said quietly, "Maybe back then we assumed time would fix everything." She nodded. "But time doesn't fix everything. Some things have to be fixed by people themselves." Hearing that put a slight pressure in my chest. During our relationship, we had both waited for the other person to take the first step. I said, "We were both stubborn." My ex-girlfriend laughed softly. "We still are, but not like before." Her smile reminded me of an old day. Once we had argued over something very small. We didn't speak for an entire day. But in the evening, she suddenly stood in front of me and said, "I can't stay angry." As that memory returned, an unconscious smile appeared on my lips. Noticing it, she said, "Why are you smiling again?" I said, "I remembered something from the old days." Without me saying more, she understood which day I meant. For a moment, that old brightness returned to her eyes. "We were so childish back then," she said softly. "Maybe," I replied, "but those days were very real." She nodded slowly. "Yes, very real." It had started raining outside. Small drops were gathering on the window glass. The scene felt strangely familiar. During our relationship, it had rained like this one day while we were sitting in this very place. Looking at the window, my ex-girlfriend said, "Remember you said you didn't like the rain?" I laughed. "I still don't like it much." "That's not true," she said immediately. "You just didn't like getting wet, but you loved watching the rain." I looked at her with slight surprise. Even after all these years, she remembered these small details, and it touched me in a strange way. "You remember a lot," I said softly. In a calm voice, she replied, "Some memories can't be forgotten." Her words lingered in the air for a moment. I could feel we were both experiencing the same thing, a gentle mixed emotion that carried warmth and a hint of pain. Suddenly, my ex-girlfriend turned fully toward me. There was a serious look on her face. "Can I tell you something honestly?" she asked. The pounding in my chest grew a little stronger. "Go ahead," I said, trying to stay calm. She looked into my eyes for a few seconds, as if arranging her words. "After our breakup, I thought about calling you many times," she said softly, "but every time I stopped, I listened in silence. I was afraid," she continued, "afraid that you might not want to talk to me anymore." There was a soft tremor in her voice. I could tell this confession wasn't easy for her. I said slowly, "I might have talked, but back then neither of us was ready." My ex-girlfriend lowered her head, then said softly, "Maybe today we are ready." Hearing that stirred a strange feeling inside me. It felt like our conversation was about to take an important turn. The restaurant lights had grown softer. The sound of rain, the gentle music, and the silence between us made the moment feel deeper. In a calm voice, I asked, "Ready for what?" My ex-girlfriend looked straight into my eyes. For a few seconds, she didn't say anything. But there were so many words in her gaze that a quiet uneasiness formed in my chest. It felt like what she was about to say wouldn't be easy for either of us. Finally, she said softly, "Ready to tell the truth." Her voice was calm but firm. I realized my hand had unconsciously tightened on the table. "What truth?" I asked quietly. She took a deep breath. "I've realized something for a long time," she said. "No matter how far people move forward, some feelings never completely disappear." A silent wave rose inside my chest. I didn't say anything. I just listened. "I tried," she continued. "New people, a new life, new distractions. I tried to convince myself that the past was over. But sometimes I still thought of you." The sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade away. I could only hear her voice. "Seeing you suddenly today," she said, "made me feel like I can't lie to myself anymore." My throat went dry. "What are you trying to say?" I asked softly. She stayed silent for a few seconds. Her fingers were touching the rim of her coffee cup, but she didn't seem to notice. "I still feel something for you," she finally said. The words were spoken very quietly, but they hit hard inside me. I felt my heartbeat quicken. I looked toward the window. The rain was falling harder. Many thoughts were spinning in my head at once, old memories, old feelings, and the reality of the present. For a while, we both stayed silent. Then I said slowly, "Having feelings doesn't mean everything will go back to the way it was." She lifted her head. There was a faint trace of hurt in her eyes, but she tried to remain calm. "I know," she said. "I'm not talking about a fairy tale. I just wanted to be honest." I looked at her. Her honesty touched me. Even after all these years, she hadn't hidden her feelings. In a calm voice, I said, "Seeing you brings up a lot of feelings for me too. But those feelings are different now." She listened carefully. "Before, there was a rush in our emotions," I said. "We wanted everything too quickly. Now I understand some things are beautiful simply as memories." As I spoke, a faint ache spread through my chest, because I knew this moment was important for both of us. My ex-girlfriend asked softly, "Are you saying what we had ends here?" I took a few seconds, then said, "What we had isn't ending, it's complete. Like a story with a beautiful beginning, storms in the middle, and a calm ending." She stayed quiet. There was a faint shimmer of tears in her eyes, but she tried to smile. "You speak much more deeply than before," she said. I smiled lightly. "Time changes people," she nodded. "Yes, it does." Outside, the rain was slowly easing. Inside the restaurant, a warm, peaceful atmosphere had formed. I could feel that we were both standing near an invisible boundary. She said softly, "I don't know what the future holds. But after talking to you today, it feels like a weight has been lifted." "I feel the same," I said. We smiled gently at each other. There was gratitude in that smile for once being part of each other's lives, but I could tell she hadn't said everything yet. There was hesitation in her eyes, as if she was facing another important decision. She straightened slightly. Can I say one more thing? She asked. The familiar pounding returned to my chest. Go ahead, I said calmly. She took a deep breath. I noticed her fingers trembling slightly. She was rarely like this. She had always kept her emotions under control. But today she was clearly nervous. I'll say it directly, she said softly. I don't want to go in circles. My heartbeat sounded louder in my ears. I didn't speak, I just looked at her. After seeing you today, she said, I realized something very clearly. I still want us to try again. For a moment, time seemed to stop. All the sounds of the restaurant faded into the background. Her words echoed in my head, try again. She quickly added, I know it sounds sudden, but I've thought about it for a long time. Seeing you today made me feel like maybe this is an opportunity. There was no pressure or demand in her eyes, only open honesty. She had placed her heart in front of me. Inside me, a storm was raging. Old laughter, arguments, love, everything came rushing back at once. A part of me wanted to say yes, to start again. The pull of returning to familiar love was powerful, but another part of me, the part shaped by time, quietly reminded me how far we had come. I took a slow breath. Have you thought about, I said softly, why we separated? She nodded. Yes, and I know we made mistakes, but people change, we've changed. Exactly, I said, we've changed. And that change is important. She listened closely. There was hope in her eyes, a soft, fragile hope. I looked at my hand resting on the table, then back at her. I'm going to tell you something honestly, I said calmly. Seeing you today makes me feel good, really good. It feels like a beloved old chapter suddenly opened again. A light appeared in her eyes. But, I said gently, I don't want to go back to that chapter. Her expression shifted subtly. The hope hadn't completely broken, but it had shaken. I chose my words carefully because I didn't want to hurt her. Our relationship was an important part of my life, I said. It taught me a lot about love and about myself. But the person I am now doesn't want to return to the past and start the same story again. She listened in silence. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she tried to hold them back. Why? She asked very softly. Looking into her eyes, I said, because I want to keep our memories beautiful. I'm afraid that if we try again, we might lose that beauty. For a moment, there was complete silence. The restaurant lights, distant conversations, the last drops of rain on the glass slowly returned. She looked down. I could see her struggling with her emotions. After a few seconds, she gave a small, pained smile. I understand, she said. Not completely, but I'm trying to. Softly, I said, you're someone I'll always respect. And maybe that's why I want to be honest. She lifted her head. There was sadness in her eyes, but also a mature calm. You were always honest, she said. That's one of your strengths and sometimes your weakness. I smiled lightly. Maybe. She took a deep breath as if gathering herself. I'm glad I said it, she said quietly. Even if the answer isn't what I hoped for, I'm glad you said it too, I replied. If you hadn't, it might have stayed between us forever. We both understood this was the moment our story truly ended. No arguments, no anger. Just two people who once loved each other, now saying goodbye with respect. She said softly, so is this our last meeting? After thinking for a moment, I said, not the last. But not a new beginning, maybe it's a peaceful farewell, she nodded slowly. We paid the bill and stepped outside the restaurant together. The rain had stopped, the air smelled clean and cool. Standing by the door, we looked at each other for a few seconds. She smiled gently. Take care of yourself. You too, I replied. For a moment, it felt like she wanted to say something more. But in the end, she just nodded and slowly began to walk away. I stood there watching her disappear into the distance. Strangely, there was no heavy pain inside me, only a soft peace. I realized that not every love story is meant to end with togetherness. Some stories exist only to help us grow, and I was ready to move forward. I stood there for a while. The streetlights reflected on the wet ground. People walked past, cars hummed by, distant laughter floated in the air, everything was normal. Yet inside me, a chapter quietly closed. I began to walk slowly. With every step, it felt like I wasn't just crossing the street, I was setting down a weight from my past. As I walked, I suddenly realized that today's meeting wasn't an accident. Maybe life needed it. All the unspoken words that had built up between us for so long were finally released. I admitted to myself that my ex-girlfriend had been an important part of my life. She taught me how to love someone deeply, and she also taught me when to let go. There was a time when I thought a relationship ending meant failure. But now I understand, not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some relationships come to change us. They come to make us grow. I stopped at a corner of the street. I didn't look back, because I knew what was behind me was beautiful, but it was the past. A soft notification appeared on my phone. I glanced at the screen and slipped it back into my pocket. In that moment, I just wanted to listen to the sound of my own breathing. I remembered how I once thought my life would be incomplete without my ex-girlfriend. Today I understand life doesn't stop for anyone. We live with memories, but we keep moving forward. And strangely, that realization made me feel lighter. Quietly, I said to myself, thank you. Thank you for those days, for the laughter, even for the pain. Because together, they shaped the person I am today. Maybe someday, many years from now, we'll run into each other again somewhere. We'll smile politely like strangers, exchange a few simple words. And somewhere inside us, a gentle memory will sit quietly, but nothing will ever be as deep as today. I looked up at the sky. The clouds had cleared and a few stars were visible. Life felt the same to me. Storms come and cover the sky, but they don't last forever. As I kept walking, I felt one thing very clearly. I was ready. Ready for new days, for new stories. My ex-girlfriend wanted to come back into a relationship, and I said no. There was no anger in it, no regret, because inside that no was my growth. I know I'll always wish her well. I hope she finds peace and happiness in her life, and I will keep moving forward on my own path. Taking one last deep breath, I looked ahead. Life was waiting. And I started walking, respecting the past, but moving toward the future. Not every love story is meant to end in togetherness. Some stories exist only to help us grow. I'm Liam, and this was my story.